Thank you, everyone, for having me here tonight to hopefully provide you with a little bit of background and information about LAFCO. In the back of the room, there is a brochure which is published by LAFCO, which is our state trade association of all the LAFCOs in all 58 counties in California, and there's also a stack of my business cards. So please feel free to take either of those. Could we go to the next slide, please? So again, what the heck is a LAFCO? Local Agency Formation Commission. It's an acronym. Now, this is a slide I typically lead off with. The first paragraph is a short description of what LAFCO is, and the second paragraph is a description of kind of what we do. I want to make a very critical point about our name. I like to tell people that we are the Local Agency Formation Commission for the County of Los Angeles and not the Local Agency Formation Commission of the County of Los Angeles. LAFCOs were deliberately set up as independent public agencies. That is independent of the county and the city and the special districts whose boundaries we have authority over. So I'm going to go on a little bit down the road to describe who my bosses are, but it's important that you understand that by law, we are not a part of county government. Next slide, please. These are some of the founding principles about LAFCO. Every county in California has a LAFCO. We were originally established in 1963 by the state legislature and governor. LAFCO commissioners are local and not state appointees. And when the legislation was being discussed in 1963, the governor and the legislature thought it would be a really good idea to just have one LAFCO that established all boundaries for all cities and all districts appointed by the folks in Sacramento. And fortunately for all of us, some folks at cities and counties and special districts and chambers of commerce thought that was a really dumb idea. So we ended up with the system we have now. State laws give broad discretion to commissions to apply the law in light of local circumstances. So although there is a law, the Cortese-Knox-Hertzberg Local Government Reorganization Act of 2000, that's a mouthful, so we just call it the Act. That governs the policies and practices of all 58 LAFCOs, but we are allowed to apply that law in light of local circumstances. Each LAFCO has authority over boundary decisions within that county, and each LAFCO is independent of other LAFCOs. So our LAFCO has no authority over what happens in Kern or Ventura or Orange County and vice versa. And lastly, the decisions that the commission, LAFCO, makes, the elected members of LAFCO make, are final, and they cannot be appealed to another administrative body. So if you are unhappy with a LAFCO determination, your only remedy essentially is to file a lawsuit against LAFCO. That has not happened in my 5 years. I'm hoping to keep that record intact as long as I can. This next slide, I wanted to just provide some background about how the state regulates boundaries of cities and special districts. The California Constitution has a provision, and that provision says, excuse me, that the legislature is to prescribe a uniform procedure for city formation and provide for city powers. So that relates to cities. In terms of special districts like the two that are here before you tonight, they receive their power through state statutes. So the legislature also has the authority to create, to dissolve, or to change their jurisdiction. The process for formations and boundary changes is found in this document. Again, that's the Cortese-Knox Local Government Reorganization Act of 2000. And in that body, in the body of that document, the legislature essentially delegates its boundary powers over cities and districts to local LAFCOs. Next slide, please. I like to use this slide because it is essentially what it is that the legislature and governor have tasked LAFCOs with doing. These are essentially the mission statement. It's page 1, first paragraph of the act. Encourage orderly growth, promote logical formation of agency boundaries, discourage urban sprawl, and preserve open space and prime agricultural lands. So that is essentially what the legislature has asked LAFCOs to do. Next slide, please. Okay. So who sits on LAFCO? Who do I and the staff I work with work for? It's a commission of 9 members, and they're all described up there on the screen. I'm going to attach some personalities and names to each of those. The 2 county supervisor members right now are Supervisor Don Kanabi and Supervisor Sheila Kuehl. That will change in December because Supervisor Kanabi is termed out of office. 1 member of the Los Angeles City Council, that's currently Paul Krikorian from the San Fernando Valley. 2 members of city councils from the other 88 cities. So the other 88 cities actually get together and elect which mayors or city council members will represent them. Our 2 current members are David Spence, who is a council member in the city of La Cañada, Flint Ridge, and Margaret Finley, who is council member in the city of Doherty. 2 members representing independent special districts. One is Castaic Lake Water Agency Board member Jerry Gladback, and the other is West Basin Municipal Board member Don Deere, and they're elected in a similar fashion. The independent special districts get together and decide who to appoint. By law, there is a special seat on LAFCO for the San Fernando Valley, and that person is Richard Close. He is both an attorney and a homeowner association president in Sherman Oaks, and he is appointed by the county board. And then 1 member representing the general public who is appointed by the other members, and that currently is a gentleman by the name of Gerard McCallum, who actually lives right on the boundary of the city of Los Angeles and the county of Los Angeles. So he has kind of an interesting perspective when he came to LAFCO. So that's the basic 9 members. We are the largest LAFCO in the state by virtue of those last 2 seats. Could you keep it on that back slide, please? I'm sorry. And then there's 1 alternate for each of those categories. So we have 9 members and 6 alternates. Sorry, go ahead. You can go to the next slide. This is a list of the public agencies over which LAFCO has authority relative to their boundaries. So you note I changed the order a little bit just to highlight that includes county water districts like Newhall and what are called special act districts, which are created by a special act of the legislature, like Castaic Lake Water Agency. Now you'll notice on that list, after water districts, sort of the more broad category, there's an asterisk, and there's a reason for that. There are certain water districts whose boundaries are within LAFCO purview. Irrigation districts, county waterworks districts, municipal water districts. Those are within our authority. There are other water entities over whom we have no responsibility. Mutual water companies, private water companies. So those are generally regulated by state agencies like the Bureau of Corporations and the Public Utilities Commission. But I mention that because in some cases people assume we have power over them. We actually do not. If you go to the next slide, please. I always like to include this slide of the things that we don't or can't do. The first one is a very specific provision in the law that was extremely important to cities and counties, which is essentially that we are not an agency with land use authority. You do not get your zoning approval or your subdivision from LAFCO. That power is vested out here in the Santa Clarita Valley with the city of Santa Clarita, if you're within the boundaries of the city, and in the county unincorporated areas by the county board. We also do not regulate the boundaries of counties. So if Orange and LA County want to adjust their boundaries, that is a decision of those 2 boards of supervisors. It's actually a very different process than what we go through at LAFCO, and it's literally just a decision of those 2 boards. There are a whole bunch of other districts that are listed up there. I love the fact that redevelopment agencies is on there. It kind of dates my slides. But for example, when you talk about school district boundaries, the Lord smiled on LAFCO and decided someone else would get to decide those, because you start to tell people where their water service comes from, they get a little worked up. You tell them where their kids are going to school, they get really worked up. So thankfully, we don't have that. That's the LA County Office of Education. And even community college districts, there is an entity which regulates their boundaries. So those are things that we do not handle. Next slide, please. What the heck do LAFCOs do? These are the 3 primary things that I think you'll be interested in. Number 1, we create new cities and special districts. That would be, in our act, the incorporation of a new city. The 2 most recent of which were quite some time ago, which are Malibu and Calabasas. Or the formation of a new special district, the most recent of which was the creation of the Newhall Ranch Sanitation District. Don't ask me the year because I'm not exactly sure. Thank you, 2006. The second one is probably the item most people are familiar with LAFCO, and that is changing the boundaries of cities and special districts. The first one, annexation, is probably the one most people are familiar with. There is an unincorporated area that a city wants to annex, it comes to LAFCO. Or there is some geographic area or property not within the boundaries of a water district or a sanitation district or even a library or park district, and that's annexed to that district. We also process detachments where territory is removed from a city or a district. Disincorporation of cities, although we're empowered to do that in the law, in the last 50 years, it's happened once by a LAFCO, not ours. Dissolution of a special district, our agency initiated, the commission initiated, processed, and approved the dissolution of a water district in unincorporated East Pasadena about 2 years ago. And finally, the consolidation of cities or special districts. The last item of the three is adopting and amending spheres of influence, or SOIs. A sphere of influence is sort of the intended ultimate boundary of a city or a special district. And in order to annex territory into a city or district, it first has to be put into its SOI. And the presumption is that the area that is within the boundaries of a sphere of influence will ultimately be annexed by that city or district. Next slide, please. Public agencies, representatives of public agencies come to LAFCO all the time. And they approach us about, they're considering annexing, detaching, doing whatever it is that they're looking at doing. And along those lines, I was approached recently by representatives of both CLWA and Newhall about the possibility of potentially consolidating the two districts. So if an application is ultimately filed with LAFCO, under LAFCO law, that's defined as a proposal because everybody else calls them applications, so our law calls them proposals just to confuse everyone. And this slide kind of talks about the typical process that we go through with potential applicants. And I say potential applicants because probably about of 10 inquiries from a public agency about an annexation or some other action, probably about 3 or 4 of those ultimately result in an approval or an application being filed. So we are in step 1 with these gentlemen here, the pre-filing consultation. They're coming to us finding out what our rules and processes are, and we're engaging them in a conversation. Ultimately, if they decide to move forward, they would file a proposal. One of the first things LAFCO is required to do is essentially distribute that to all public agencies who are impacted. So that's going to be county, city, fire districts, other districts, essentially anyone with authority in that area and anyone who receives a share of the taxes. There's then a critical path item is usually the property tax transfer. What that means is that a very small share of the property taxes is currently assigned to a water district, a city, a school district, a bunch of other agencies. That share of the taxes gets reallocated. By law, that is not something LAFCO takes the initiative on. In LA County, it's typically done by the LA County CEO's office, who is looking at all of that information, deciding how that gets reassigned. Usually when that comes in, at that point, we have a complete file, and by law, I can't agendize a matter for the commission for LAFCO unless I have a complete file. But once that's complete, and during that time, we start evaluating the proposal and trying to come up with a recommendation for the commission. It is ultimately the commission's decision. It is not mine. If I ever forget that, they're all more than happy to remind me of that fact. But it is ultimately their decision. There's a commission public hearing and determination, which is followed by a protest process, which essentially allows members of the public to file written objections if they choose to. And finally, assuming a proposal goes through and everything is approved, we record what's called a certificate of completion with our 2 initials down there. RRCC is the LA County Registrar Recorder County Clerk. When that gets recorded, that annexation is effective. And then we also file this copy of the same document with BOE, which is the State of California Board of Equalization, which essentially implements the tax transfer, the reassigned taxes.